Emily sat on the old city bus, clutching the pink slip that had changed everything. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she stared at the words that meant her world was falling apart. After 3 years of working at Henderson's print shop, she was no longer needed. Budget cuts, they said. Nothing personal, they said. But it felt very personal to Emily. The 29-year-old had always dreamed of being a real artist. But fear had kept her safe behind the counter of the print shop. She told herself it was practical work, steady work. But deep down, she knew she was hiding from her true calling. Now, with nowhere to hide, she felt more lost than ever. Rain drummed against the bus window as London's busy streets blurred past. The grey sky matched her mood perfectly. Emily pressed her face against the cool glass and tried not to cry in front of the other passengers. Her small fat's rent was due in 10 days. And her bank account held exactly £20.37. She had counted it 3 times that morning, hoping somehow the numbers would change. The worn portfolio bag on her lap felt heavier than usual. Inside were years of her artwork, sketches, paintings and designs that no one had ever seen except her landlord's daughter, who sometime visited while Emily babysat. The little girl always said Emily's drawings were beautiful, but what did a 7-year-old know about real art? Across the narrow aisle sat an older woman with the kindest eyes Emily had ever seen. The woman had silver hair pulled back in a neat bun and wore a simple blue cardigan with a volunteer name tag that read Margaret. She was sketching the other passengers in a small, leather-bound notebook. Her hands moved with surprising steadiness for someone who must have been in her 70s. Emily watched Margaret work, fascinated by how she captured each person's essence with just a few gentle lines. The businessman. Reading his newspaper became alive on the page. The young mother holding her sleeping baby looked peaceful and content in Margaret's drawing. There was something magical about the way this stranger saw beauty in ordinary people during ordinary moments. The bus hit a particularly large pothole, and Emily's portfolio bag slipped from her lap. The zipper, which had been broken for months, finally gave up completely. Papers and artwork scattered across the dirty bus floor like fallen leaves. Emily's cheeks burned with embarrassment as she scrambled together her precious work. Oh no, she whispered, trying to collect everything before other passengers noticed. But it was too late. Her most personal sketches were visible to everyone. Portraits of people she had observed, landscapes of places she dreamed of visiting, and designs for logos and advertisements that existed only in her imagination. Margaret immediately sat down, her notebook, and bent down to help. Her gentle hands carefully lifted each piece of artwork as if it were made of gold. As she looked at Emily's work, her eyes grew wide with genuine surprise and admiration. "These are absolutely wonderful, dear," Margaret said warmly, handing Emily a particularly detailed drawing of the Thames at sunset. "You have real talent. These drawings have so much life and feeling in them." Emily felt tears building in her eyes after the worst day of her life. This stranger's kindness felt like a warm hug when she needed it most. "Not talented enough to keep my job," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rumble of the bus engine. Margaret carefully helped Emily put the last of the artwork back into the broken bag. Then she looked directly into Emily's eyes with an expression that was both understanding and hopeful. "Sometimes life closes one door to open another, dear. The question is whether you're brave enough to walk through it." The older woman's words hung in the air between them like a challenge and a promise at the same time. Emily had heard similar sayings before, but coming from Margaret, they felt different. They felt true. There was something about this woman that made Emily believe that maybe, just maybe, losing her job wasn't the end of everything. "I've been playing it safe my whole life," Emily admitted. Surprised by her own honesty, "I've been too scared too. Try being a real artist. What if I'm not good enough? What if I fail?" Margaret smiled and gently patted Emily's hand. "What if you succeed? What if this is exactly the push you needed to discover what you're truly capable of?" As the bus continued through the rainy London streets, Emily felt something shifting inside her chest. It wasn't quite hope yet, but it was something. For the first time in years, she began to imagine what it might feel like to be brave. She thought about all the small businesses she passed every day, all the people who might need someone to help them tell their stories through art and design. The bus was approaching Emily's stop. But she didn't want this conversation to end. She looked at Margaret one more time, memorizing the woman's kind face and gentle smile. "Thank you," Emily said simply. Margaret nodded knowingly. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us that endings can be beginnings. Emily woke up before her alarm clock the next morning. Margaret's words had been spinning in her mind all night like a song she couldn't forget. Sometimes life closes one door to open another. You just have to be brave enough to walk through it. The older woman's gentle voice seemed to echo in her small flat as Emily made her morning tea. She had barely slept. But strangely, she didn't feel tired. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, curiosity about what the day might bring. Emily found herself getting dressed with more care than usual, even putting on her favorite blue scarf that made her feel confident as she walked to the bus stop. Emily realized she was hoping to see Margaret again. The thought surprised her. She had always been shy around strangers, but something about the older woman made her feel safe and understood. Maybe it was the way Margaret had looked at her artwork with such genuine appreciation, or how she had spoken about doors and new beginnings without making Emily feel foolish for being scared. The familiar red bus arrived right on time, and Emily's heart lifted when she spotted Margaret sitting in the same seat as yesterday. The older woman was already sketching in her notebook, but she looked up with a bright smile when she saw Emily climbing the steps. "I was hoping you'd come back," Margaret said warmly, moving her small purse to make room on the seat beside her. "I wanted to tell you something important." Emily sat down, feeling nervous and excited at the same time. She noticed that Margaret's notebook was filled with dozens of sketches of people from different bus rides. Each drawing captured something special about the person: a tired worker's determination, a young mother's love, an elderly man's wisdom. Margaret saw beauty everywhere she looked. "Yesterday, after we talked, I couldn't stop thinking about you," Margaret began as the bus pulled away from the stop. "You reminded me so much of myself many years ago. I was scared and lost, just like you are now." As the bus rolled through London's morning streets, Margaret began to share her story. Her voice was quiet but strong, like someone who had learned important lessons through difficult times. 20 years earlier, Margaret had worked as a secretary at a law firm. She thought she had job security, a steady future. But one Friday afternoon, her boss called her into his office and told her the firm was downsizing. "I was a single mother with 2 young children," Margaret explained, her fingers absently tracing the edge of her notebook. "My husband had left us 3 years before, and I had no family to help. When I lost that job, I thought my life was completely over." Emily listened carefully, feeling a connection to Margaret's fear and uncertainty. She understood what it felt like to have the ground disappear from under your feet, to wonder how you would survive. "I had exactly £15 in my bank account, and rent due in a week," Margaret continued. "I remember sitting in my kitchen, crying and wondering how I would feed my children. But then my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, knocked on my door. Her daughter's school uniform had torn, and she asked if I knew anyone who could mend it. Margaret smiled at the memory. I had always been good with a needle and thread. My mother taught me when I was young, so I fixed the uniform, and Mrs. Patterson was so grateful that she gave me £5 and told all her friends about my work. Within a week, Margaret had 3 more neighbours asking her to mend clothes, hem curtains, and fix tears in their children's school clothes. She was terrified every time someone brought her something to repair, worried that she would make a mistake or disappoint them. But that fear made her work harder than she ever had before. Fear can be a powerful teacher, Margaret said thoughtfully. It taught me to pay attention to every detail, to treat each person's clothes like they were precious treasures. Margaret reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a small, slightly faded business card. She handed it to Emily with obvious pride. The card read Margaret's alterations, serving London families for 20 years in elegant script, with a small illustration of a sewing machine in the corner. I built this business from nothing. Emily, no money, no experience running a company, just fear and determination, Margaret said. My little alteration shop has helped me raise 2 wonderful children who are now grown and successful. I've sewn wedding dresses, fixed school uniforms, and helped thousands of people look their best for important moments in their lives. Emily studied the business card, amazed by Margaret's transformation from scared single mother to successful business owner. How did you know you could do it? She asked. I didn't know, Margaret replied honestly. But I knew I had to try, and I see that same strength in you, dear. What's stopping you from using your beautiful art to help people? Emily thought about all the small businesses she passed every day during her walks through the neighborhood. Thompson's Bakery had a hand-painted sign that was faded and hard to read. The flower shop on Elm Street used photocopied flyers that looked unprofessional. The Italian restaurant where she sometimes bought coffee had outdated menus and no real logo. Maybe I could help them with their designs, Emily said quietly, the idea forming as she spoke. Margaret squeezed Emily's hand gently. Now you're thinking like an entrepreneur, not an employee. Emily spent her weekend doing something she had never done before, walking round her neighborhood with purpose. She carried her portfolio bag, now held together with safety pins since the zipper had completely broken. Her plan was simple but terrifying. She would visit every small business she could find and offer design services for free. Saturday morning started with a long look in the mirror. Emily practiced introducing herself over and over again. Hello, I'm Emily, and I'm a graphic designer. The word felt strange in her mouth. She had never called herself a graphic designer before, even though she had been creating art her whole life. Her first stop was Thompson's Bakery, a small shop she passed every day on her way to the bus stop. She had always loved the smell of fresh bread that drifted onto the sidewalk, but she had never actually been inside. Now, standing in front of the glass door, her heart pounded so hard she was sure everyone on the street could hear it. The bell above the door chimed as Emily stepped inside. The bakery was warm and cozy, filled with the wonderful smells of cinnamon rolls and fresh coffee. Behind the counter stood a man in his 50s with flour-dusted apron and tired eyes. This must be Mr. James Thompson, the owner. James looked up from arranging pastries in the display case. He had the weary expression of someone who worked long hours and worried about paying bills. Emily noticed that his current signs were hand-painted but faded from years of sunlight and weather. The menu board behind him was difficult to read, with prices written in different colored markers that had started to blur together. "Can I help you?" James asked politely, though Emily could hear the exhaustion in his voice. Emily's mouth went dry. This was the moment she had been practicing for, but now that it was real, she felt like running away. Instead, she thought about Margaret's business card and how proud the older woman had looked when she shared her story. "Excuse me," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. She cleared her throat and tried again. "I'm Emily, and I'm a graphic designer. I noticed your shop could use some new signage, and I'd like to offer my services for free, just to build my portfolio." James stopped arranging pastries and looked at her with genuine surprise. He studied her face, probably wondering if this was some kind of trick or sales pitch. "Free, you say? What's the catch?" he asked suspiciously. Emily understood his doubt. In a world where nothing was truly free, her offer probably seemed too good to be true. "No catch," she replied, gaining confidence as she spoke. "I just want to help local businesses look their best. I'm starting my own design business, and I need examples of my work to show future clients." James walked round the counter and stood in front of his faded window sign. He rubbed his chin thoughtfully, leaving a small streak of flour on his face. "I painted this sign myself 10 years ago," he admitted. "I'm not much of an artist, but I couldn't afford to hire someone professional." Emily opened her portfolio and showed James some of her best work. His eyes widened as he looked through her sketches and designs. "These are really good," he said with growing excitement. "You could really help my bakery stand out from the coffee chains down the street." They shook hands, and Emily felt a thrill of accomplishment she had never experienced at the print shop. This was different. This was helping someone real achieve their dreams while building her own future at the same time. Emily spent the entire next week working on Thompson's bakery project. She designed a new logo that featured a simple but elegant wheat stalk intertwined with the bakery's name. The colors were warm and inviting, golden yellow and rich brown that reminded customers of fresh bread and comfort. She created new menu boards with clear, easy-to-read fonts and organized the items in a way that made everything look more appealing. When James saw the finished designs, his reaction was better than Emily had dared to hope for. His tired eyes lit up with joy and pride. "This makes my little bakery look like a real business," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I can't believe you did all this for free." The transformation was immediate. Within days of installing the new signs, Thompson's bakery had more customers than James had seen in months. People stopped to read the clear menu boards and were drawn in by the professional appearance of the shop. James was so pleased that he recommended Emily to his friend who owned the flower shop next door. Mrs. Patricia Williams had been struggling to compete with the large garden center that had opened across town. Emily designed a charming logo featuring delicate flowers and elegant script that perfectly captured the personal touch that made the small shop special. Word spread quickly through the neighborhood's small business community. Soon, Emily was working with 5 different shops and restaurants. She charged very little for her services, sometimes just enough to buy groceries or pay for art supplies. But the work felt more meaningful than anything she had ever done before. The hardest part was the uncertainty that came with each new day. Some weeks she made enough money to pay her bills comfortably. Other weeks she survived on tea and toast, wondering if she had made a terrible mistake leaving the security of her print shop job. But every time she felt like giving up and looking for another safe job. She remembered Margaret's words about being brave enough to walk through new doors. She thought about James's proud smile and Mrs. Williams's grateful tears when she saw her beautiful new logo. One evening, Emily was working late in her flat, designing a poster for the Italian restaurant on her street. As she carefully chose colors and arranged text, she realized something important had changed inside her. For the first time in years, she felt truly alive. 3 months had passed since Emily first walked into Thompson's bakery with her broken portfolio bag and trembling hands. Now, as she climbed the narrow stairs to her small office above the bakery, she could hardly believe how much her life had changed. The sweet smell of James's fresh bread drifted up through the floorboards, creating a comforting atmosphere that made her tiny workspace feel like home. Emily's reputation had grown beyond anything she had imagined possible. Word had spread through the community like ripples in a pond about the young artist who created beautiful designs at prices that small business owners could actually afford. She had helped 12 different businesses transform their image over the past 3 months, and many of them were seeing more customers than they had in years. Her little office was barely big enough for a desk, a chair, and a filing cabinet. But Emily had made it her own. The walls were covered with examples of her work, before and after photos of shop signs, colorful logo designs, and grateful letters from business owners. Each piece told a story of dreams becoming reality through the power of good design and hard work. James had offered her the space for almost nothing, saying that her beautiful bakery signs had brought him so many new customers that having her upstairs was like having a lucky charm. Emily knew she was getting an incredible deal, but she also understood that James genuinely wanted to help her succeed. It was the kind of kindness that made small communities special. On this particular Thursday afternoon, Emily heard familiar footsteps on the wooden stairs. Margaret appeared at the top. Slightly out of breath, but smiling warmly, the older woman had become much more than the stranger who had helped her pick up scattered artwork on a bus. She had become Emily's mentor, friend, and biggest supporter. "I am so proud of you, dear," Margaret said, looking round the office with obvious admiration. She stopped in front of a framed photograph showing the dramatic transformation of Patterson's pet shop, from a cluttered, confusing storefront to a bright, welcoming place that now attracted customers from across the city. Emily poured 2 cups of tea from the small kettle she kept on her desk. It wasn't much of an office setup, but it was hers, and that made all the difference. "I've been thinking about something," she said, settling into her chair while Margaret took the only other seat in the room. "What's on your mind?" Margaret asked. Accepting her cup with grateful hands, Emily had been wrestling with an idea for weeks, but she hadn't been sure how to put it into words. "I want to do something special with my business. I see so many immigrant families starting shops and restaurants in our neighborhood, and they work incredibly hard, but they often can't afford professional design help. Their signs are handmade. Their flyers are photocopied, and customers sometimes don't even notice their businesses exist." Margaret's eyes began to sparkle with interest. She leaned forward, encouraging Emily to continue. "I want to offer free design services to immigrant-owned businesses," Emily said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "These families need help the most, but they're often the ones who can least afford to hire designers. I think I could make a real difference in their success." Margaret set down her teacup and clapped her hands together softly. "That's a beautiful idea, Emily. It's exactly the kind of thing that makes a business meaningful instead of just profitable. How can I help make this happen over the next hour?" The 2 women worked together to develop their plan. Margaret's experience with volunteer work at the local community center would be invaluable in reaching immigrant families who might benefit from Emily's services. They decided to call their program Dreams and Design, focusing on helping one new business each month with complete branding services at no cost. Margaret promised to spread the word through her connections at the community center, where she helped teach English classes and assisted families with paperwork for starting businesses. Emily would handle all the design work and printing costs, treating it as an investment in her community rather than lost income. Their first client came to them within 2 weeks. Ahmed Hassan had opened a small grocery store 6 months earlier, but he was struggling to attract customers. His store was located between two larger supermarkets, and many people in the neighborhood didn't even know he existed. The hand-painted sign above his door was difficult to read, and his business was slowly failing despite his best efforts and long hours. Margaret brought Ahmed to meet Emily on a rainy Tuesday morning. He was a quiet man in his 40s. He had moved to London from Syria 3 years earlier with his wife and 2 young children. Ahmed spoke English well, but his eyes held the exhaustion of someone who was working incredibly hard just to survive. Emily spent an entire week learning about Ahmed's business and his customers. She discovered that he carried specialty foods that the larger stores didn't offer, and he knew many of his customers by name, providing the kind of personal service that was becoming rare in their busy neighborhood. Emily created a bright, welcoming sign that could be read easily from the street. She designed simple flyers in both English and Arabic, highlighting Ahmed's unique products and friendly service. The new materials made his small store look professional and inviting. Within 3 weeks of installing the new signage, Ahmed's business was busier than it had ever been. Customers who had walked past his store for months suddenly noticed it and came inside to explore. Ahmed couldn't stop thanking Emily, telling her that she had given him hope when he was ready to close the shop and find other work. But Emily knew the truth that Ahmed didn't understand yet. Helping him and his family succeed had given her more hope and satisfaction than she had ever received in return. 1 year later, Emily stood in her expanded office space, looking out the window at the busy London street below. The small room above Thompson's bakery had grown into a proper design studio that occupied the entire second floor of the building. Sunlight streamed through large windows, illuminating the colorful artwork that covered every wall and the 2 additional desks where her employees worked on projects for local businesses. Emily could hardly believe that Community Canvas, her little design business, now employed 2 other young designers. Sarah, a recent art school graduate, specialized in digital marketing materials, while Tom had a talent for hand-lettered signs and vintage-style logos. Together, they had helped over 50 local businesses create professional branding that fit their budgets and dreams. The success still felt surreal sometimes. Emily's bank account was healthy, her rent was never late, and she had even started saving money for the future. But the real measure of her success wasn't in the numbers. It was in the grateful smiles of business owners whose shops now attracted more customers, in the thank you cards that arrived in the mail, and in the thriving neighborhood where small businesses supported each other like family. Even though Emily could now afford a car or taxi rides anywhere in the city, she still took the same bus route every morning. It was no longer a necessity, but a choice that kept her grounded and connected to the community she served. The familiar journey reminded her daily of how far she had traveled from that desperate woman clutching a pink slip just 1 year ago. On this particular Tuesday morning, the bus was moderately crowded with the usual mix of workers, students, and shoppers. Emily had chosen a seat near the middle, her small notebook in hand, ready to sketch ideas for her next project. But as the bus pulled away from her stop, she noticed something that made her heart ache with recognition. A young man sat alone near the back, his shoulders slumped in defeat. He held what looked like an official letter, the kind that changed lives in all the wrong ways. His clothes were neat but worn, and his expression was one of complete hopelessness. Emily recognized that look immediately because she had worn it herself not so long ago. The young man stared out the rain-streaked window with empty eyes, lost in thoughts that were probably dark and frightening. Emily watched him for several stops, remembering exactly how it felt to sit in that same position, wondering how she would survive the next week, let alone build any kind of future. Without overthinking her decision, Emily gathered her things and moved to sit in the empty seat beside him. She pulled out her small notebook, the same type that Margaret had always carried during their early morning conversations. The leather cover was worn soft from daily use, filled with sketches of people and ideas for designs. "Rough day?" Emily asked gently, her voice barely audible above the rumble of the bus engine. The young man looked up, clearly surprised that a stranger would speak to him. His eyes were red-rimmed, and Emily could see that he had been fighting back tears. "Lost my job yesterday," he said quietly, his voice hoarse with exhaustion. "Don't know what I'm going to do." Emily smiled warmly. The same way Margaret had smiled at her during their first conversation, you know. "Sometimes losing a job isn't the end of something," she said, opening her notebook to a fresh page. "It's the beginning of everything." As the bus rolled through London's familiar streets, Emily began to sketch the young man's portrait with quick, confident strokes. Her pencil captured the worry lines round his eyes, but also the underlying strength she could see in his face. While she drew, she told him her story. She spoke about the pink slip that had felt like the end of the world, about Margaret's kindness and wisdom, about the terrifying first day she walked into Thompson's bakery with nothing but hope and determination. She told him about learning that helping others was often the key to helping yourself, and about discovering that the scariest doors were usually the ones worth walking through. David, as he introduced himself, listened intently to every word. Emily could see his posture gradually straightening as her story unfolded. The hopelessness in his eyes began to fade, replaced by something that looked almost like curiosity about what tomorrow might bring. When Emily finished the drawing, she carefully tore the page from her notebook and handed it to David. At the bottom of the sketch, she had written Margaret's words in elegant script. "Every ending carries the seed of a new beginning." David held the drawing with careful hands, studying his own face as Emily had seen it. Not just the worry and fear, but the potential and strength that difficult times could reveal. For the first time since Emily had noticed him, he smiled. It was a small smile, uncertain but real. "Thank you," David said, his voice stronger now. "I really needed to hear that today." As Emily watched David's transformation from despair to hope, she realized something profound about the journey she had taken. The most important destinations in life weren't places you were trying to reach, but the people you helped discover their own strength along the way. The bus continued its route through London, carrying David toward whatever new beginning awaited him. Emily smiled, knowing that somewhere in the city, Margaret was probably sitting on another bus, sketching strangers and sharing wisdom with someone who needed to hear that their story wasn't over. Yet, the circle of kindness continued, one conversation and one act of hope at a time.